Tonight's fight is Dreyfuss versus Dreyfuss, coming up right now on Eric's Trains. All right, so in Lionel's 2023 Volume 1 catalog, they offered their latest rendition of the famed New York Central Dreyfuss Hudson, and they also offered some matching passenger cars. Now, the passenger cars showed up about a month or so ago, and then just a week or two ago, the Dreyfuss locomotive showed up. And as soon as it dropped, I started hearing all sorts of complaints, people saying the gray was too light, the striping's wrong, the sounds are wrong, the passenger cars don't match. Anything you can imagine, people were complaining about, it seemed. Now, myself, I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I don't really have a problem with it, but evidently a lot of people do. So what I thought we'd do in this video is take a look at the new Lionel Dreyfuss and the passenger cars, and also do a comparison between that and the MTH Dreyfuss that was done some years ago, and then I'll let you form your own opinion. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. All right, so here's our box, model number 2331412, New York Central Legacy Dreyfuss J3 number 5447, with an on-the-water date of September 8th, 2023. Now, for today's unboxing from my knife collection, well, I figured we've got a New York locomotive. Let's use a New York knife, and so this is an Ontario Knife Company knife. They're headquartered in New York, or they were. I think they got bought out or just went out of business, or they're about to go out of business, but this is one of their old hickory knives, the old hickory hunting knife. Very simple, yet kind of elegant. Let's see how the old hickory does at unboxing. It might be good at hunting, but can it unbox? There we go. And there's our box tag. New York Central Legacy Dreyfuss J3 5447, Legacy and Bluetooth control, Legacy rail sounds, whistle steam, water scoop steam, and an 072 minimum curve requirement. There's the instruction manual, always good to read that. And here goes nothing. Wow. That looks really cool. This looks great. I think it looks great. Very cool. So let's check out the tender. Now, they had several different versions of the Dreyfuss in the catalog. Some of them have the hatch above the coal. Some of them don't. Now, I've got an MTH version of the Dreyfuss Hudson that has the hatch on top. I chose to get one with an open coal load because the open coal load versions of the tender have the water scoop steam effect, which I'll show you later in the video. And I really wanted to get the water scoop steam effect, so that's why I got the open coal load on the tender. And man, this thing looks great. This is kind of cool. It's got these little hatches that swing up so they can shovel the coal. Yeah, that's really sharp. This is going to look great on the layout, especially with the matching passenger cars. All right, and there it is on the layout, and I gotta say, this thing looks incredible. So at this point, I'm sure most people watching this video know exactly what the Dreyfuss Hudson was, but for those of you who don't, I'll give you a brief historical overview, and then of course, if you want to find out more, you can always Google it. So the Dreyfuss was a 464 Hudson-type steam locomotive. The 464 refers to the wheel arrangement, so it means you've got 4 wheels up front, 6 drive wheels, and then 4 wheels on the trailing streamlining truck. Now, it's called a Dreyfuss Hudson because it was named after the guy who designed it, Henry Dreyfuss. But how did the New York Central get to this design? How did they get to the point where they were making locomotives like this? Well, it all starts back in the 1930s. I believe one of the first streamlined trains was the Pioneer Zephyr. And the reason that the railroads started streamlining their trains in the 1930s is because they were facing increased competition from airlines and automobiles. Yeah, people were flying more and driving more, and therefore taking passenger trains less and less. And so in an effort to combat that, they thought, okay, let's make the trains more beautiful and elegant, make them look futuristic, and maybe that'll help bring people back to the rails. And it did work, at least for a little while, but of course we know it didn't last because they just couldn't compete with airlines and automobiles, especially once the interstate highway system was in place. But anyway, back in the 1930s, it did help a bit, and it did bring people back to the rails to some extent. And so you get the beautiful Dreyfuss Hudsons. You also got the Empire State Express, which does look similar to the Dreyfuss Hudson. I've actually got one of those in my fleet. There it is. It looks similar, but it was not designed by Henry Dreyfuss. It was designed by a couple of other guys, but you can kind of see the resemblance anyway, and it was just all part of that effort to streamline these locomotives and make them more attractive to their customers. Now, of course, the downside of streamlining was that it made maintenance on the locomotives very difficult because now all the workers had to go through this external shroud to get to the internal steam locomotive. And so for that reason, streamlining didn't last that long. Eventually, most of the railroads kind of stopped doing it. But for a while, it made these locomotives very, very cool. Now, although the New York Central streamlined a lot of their locomotives, none of them exist today. They were all retired at various points in the 1950s. Some of them were sold off to other railroads, but all of them ended up eventually being scrapped. And a big reason for that was because the president of the New York Central at the time was a big opponent to any sort of historical preservation of their locomotives. His mindset was that if they weren't being used, get rid of them, scrap them, don't save them. And that really sucks because it would be so cool if one of these was still around today. I'm sure if it was, it would already be restored or be in the process of being restored. Although one interesting point is that the Dreyfuss did make an appearance in a modern movie, The Iron Giant. Now, coming back to Lionel's rendition of the Dreyfuss Hudson, as I said, Lionel offered this in their 2023 Volume 1 catalog, and it was actually featured on the cover of the catalog alongside the Vision Line Big Boy, so clearly Lionel was really excited about it. On pages 20 through 23 of the catalog, Lionel offered 5 different versions of the Dreyfuss. They did road number 5445 with a PT tender that has the water scoop steam effect on it and box block drivers on the locomotive. They did road number 5447, which is what we have here, that's got the PT tender with the water scoop steam effect and the skull and disc drivers on the locomotive. They did a second version of 5445 that's got the shorter tender with the hatches up on top. It's kind of an undecorated version because there's no New York Central logo on the tender at all, and that has the skull and disc drivers on the locomotive. Then they did road number 5454 with a PT tender with the water scoop steam effect and the skull and disc drivers on the locomotive, and that one has a really cool reversed paint scheme where the grays are reversed, and I think it looks really cool. Then they did road number 5449, which has the short tender with the coal flaps up on top and the box block drivers on the locomotive. And then lastly, they did road number 5452 that has the short tender with the coal flaps up on top and the skull and disc drivers on the locomotive. So I think they offered a nice choice of variations, and between the 5 versions, you should be able to find one that you like. And then with the 8 matching passenger cars, they did a standard 2-pack, they did a Station Sounds Diner 2-pack, and they also did a 4-pack that has an observation car at the end. And by the way, just in case it wasn't clear when I was describing the different versions of the Dreyfuss that Lionel offered, the versions that have the PT tender is the only one that has the water scoop steam effect. If you get the shorter tender that has the coal flaps up on top, that does not have the water scoop steam effect. And because of that, there is a slight price difference between the two. The Dreyfuss with the short tender that does not have the water scoop steam effect has a retail price that's $100 less than the version that I have here that does have the water scoop steam effect. All right, so let's get some stats on this thing. Now, the minimum required curve needed to operate this locomotive is 0.72. The length is right at, about 26.5 inches, maybe a hair more. And let's weigh this thing. So the locomotive weighs in at 7 pounds, 1.2 ounces, not bad. And the tender comes in at 4 pounds, 11.4 ounces. Again, not bad. And we'll do them both together. And we get 11 pounds, 12.3, 12.4 ounces. Very respectable. And lastly, when I tested the pulling power on this thing, it came in right at 2 pounds, 8 ounces, 2.5 pounds, which is average. It's not great. It's not lackluster. It's right there in the middle. It's not going to win any pulling contests, but it'll pull pretty much anything you need it to pull, especially when it comes to passenger trains. Now we'll go in for some close-ups of some of the highlights of the new Dreyfuss Hudson, starting with the pilot area. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Dreyfuss Hudson may notice that there's no plate here covering up the coupler. You've just got this coupler sticking out of an otherwise streamlined body. And you might think that's a mistake, but in fact, some of the Hudsons that Lionel released do have the plate on the front and some do not. If you ordered one of the Hudsons with the shorter tender with the coal hatches up on top, it does have the plate covering the coupler area, and that plate can be removed if necessary. And if you ordered one of the PT tender Hudsons like I have, there is no plate covering the coupler. So rather than being a mistake, this was done by Lionel very much on purpose, and I believe it was done to reflect a later point in the life of the Dreyfuss Hudson. So as I said, the streamlined shell over the Hudson made maintenance extremely difficult. And so as these things got older, the New York Central began to make changes to make maintenance easier. So the lack of the coal hatches on top of the PT tender made it easier to load coal, and on the front, removing that plate made it easier to get access to the coupler. Yeah, kind of cool. So if you really want to have that plate on the front, you can get the Dreyfuss with the shorter tender that has the coal hatches up on top. If you're okay with the coupler being exposed, you can get the PT tender version that has that really cool water scoop steam effect that you'll see in just a few minutes. And by the way, you can swing this coupler down like that if you want, so that does hide it a bit. But yeah, there's no plate on the front of this version of the Dreyfuss. And then we've got the famous nose on the front of the smoke box, which I always thought looked like a Spartan helmet or something like that. But, you know, I guess it could look like other things. What do you think it looks like? And then around the corner, we get to what has always been one of my favorite spots on the Dreyfuss Hudson. It's not the cylinders, which do look fantastic, by the way, but it's all this black gear that's up in here. I'm not sure how well you can see that. But to me, it always kind of hints at the regular Hudson locomotive that's hiding underneath the streamlined shell, and I've always thought that's really neat. And then we get to all this beautiful drive gear. Now, as I said, this locomotive has these skull and disc drivers, which are the drivers that have these kind of holes in them, as opposed to the box block drivers, which kind of have teardrop-shaped holes. And like I said, depending on which Dreyfuss you buy, you'll either get the box block drivers or the skull and disc drivers. I've always been partial to the skull and disc drivers, and that's why I got this model. The area under the cab is very black, which is a nice contrast to the rest of the locomotive. And if you pay close attention when the engine is in operation, you'll see a red glow emanating from the ash pan, and that's because this model is equipped with the variable ash pan glow effect. So when the engine starts up, there'll be a red glow here, and as the engine goes faster and faster, that red glow gets more intense. Running down both sides of the boiler, there are these really nice polished handrails, and then right here you can see a legible builder's plate. Up on top, we've got the smokestack, and there is a fan-driven smoke unit down in there. And as always, to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you simply pour the smoke fluid directly down the stack. And when you pour smoke fluid down this stack, you're not only supplying smoke fluid for the smokestack, but also for the whistle steam smoke effect. And speaking of the whistle, here's that nice brass whistle here, and we've also got these really nice looking brass pop-off valves as well. And then behind that, this is another one of my favorite spots on this model. These little hatches lift up to reveal the master controls for the engine. That's really clever. So you've got the run program switch in there, the Bluetooth on-off switch, and then the switches to turn the main smoke and the whistle smoke on and off. And these hatches close back like that to hide the controls. Again, very clever. Here's a look at the inside of the cab. There are lots of hand-painted valves and gauges, as you can see, and lots of other detail on the back head. There's a red glow in the firebox when the engine is in operation. There are two hand-painted crew figures, one on either side, and the interior of the cab is lighted, and that light does turn off when the engine starts moving. Here's a look at the gap between the locomotive and the tender, and it looks pretty good back here, I must say. I'm really glad that Lionel added the drop plate. That makes it look much more realistic, and the drop plate even has safety tread on top, so yeah, it looks great back here. And then we've got the tender, and man, does this thing look fantastic. Just like the locomotive, it's all die-cast metal, so it has a great weight to it. But not only does it have a great weight on the scales, it also looks like it has a nice weight to it. We've got all this great rivet detail going on all over the place, steps and ladders on the corners, pipes going down the side, a great paint job, of course. And then we've got the hallmark water scoop steam effect, which is basically the whole reason I bought this particular model. And the way that works is that we've got these pipes coming out the side down here, and there are some on the other side as well. And when the water scoop steam effect is activated while the locomotive is in motion, smoke shoots out of these holes and gives the illusion of water shooting out of those holes, as if the locomotive had gone over a track pan full of water, scooped up water into the tender, and all the excess water was being sprayed out of these holes. It looks amazing when it's activated, and it's really the standout feature of this model, if you ask me. Now, this is not the first model to ever have the water scoop steam effect, and when I've showed it previously, a lot of people have messaged me saying, well, how do you add smoke to the water scoop steam effect smoke unit? And you do that right here on the front corner. So there's this piece, and you pop it off like that, and there is the fill hole. You pour the smoke fluid down that hole, it goes down to the smoke unit, and that's all there is to it. And then when you're done, pop that piece back on like that. And then also on the front of the tender, we've got these little coal hatches that lift up like that. I think I showed those during the unboxing. Kind of cool, nice little touch. On the top of the tender, there's not a whole lot to see, but we do have this really big coal load that's made up of little bits of real coal. And then behind that, we've got some nice detailing, and we've got this hatch. And if we open up the water hatch, there's a switch in there to turn the water scoop steam effect on or off as desired. And lastly, here's a look at the back of the tender. We've got an operating electrocoupler down here, a backup light here, and 2 operating classification lights up on the corners. All right, so now I want to show you the matching passenger cars that Lionel sold to go with the Dreyfuss Hudson. Now, I think I said before that I originally did not order the matching passenger cars, and the reason for that was because they are extremely expensive. There were 8 passenger cars made, and if you want to get all 8, you got to spend about $2,000, $2,500, something like that. Yeah, they are crazy expensive, more expensive than the locomotive. But once I went to pick up my Dreyfuss Hudson at Legacy Station, they had some of the matching passenger cars out on the display shelf, probably on purpose. And I saw the Dreyfuss with the passenger cars, and I was like, oh man, now I got to get these because they look so great with the locomotive. So what I did is I sort of compromised. I ended up getting 6 out of the available 8. I got the 4-pack with the observation car in the end, as well as the Station Sounds Diner 2-pack. I did not get the other 2-pack. So right here, we've got the mail car, the RPO car, and I'm going to bring this in closer so you can see it. I mean, this thing looks great. Look at that. Got the little mail hook and everything. The interior is detailed. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's got the little work area for the postal workers. The underside looks great. There's a switch right here on the bottom to turn the interior light on or off. I mean, these 21-inch passenger cars that Lionel makes, they're no joke. They are excellent. Expensive, but excellent. You can see we've got a soft rubber diaphragm on the end, and the doors on the end open up, which is pretty cool. The side doors don't open, but that's okay. Yeah, these are great. And they all feature interior illumination and nice detailing on the roofs too. So, like I said, they're expensive, but they are magnificent. Now this second car here is called the Cascade Glory. You can see right there. And I believe this is a sleeper car because I see sinks and toilets in there. Yeah, this is a beautiful car as well. And by the way, you'll notice the gap between the cars is very reasonable, especially for O-scale. You know, in 3-rail O-scale, we usually have about a mile between the cars, so this is actually really good. I think this next car is a sleeper car as well. This is the Imperial Court. You can see there. Very nice. And by the way, these have a very nice weight to them. Let's pull out the scale and see how much one of these weighs. So let's see here. I'm guessing this is your average car, so Just under 2 pounds 11 ounces. Not bad at all, especially for a passenger car. Next up, we've got the Station Sounds Diner car, road number 680. Again, absolutely gorgeous. We've got that antenna on top, I'm guessing. And then on the underside, we've got the controls. So got the light switch like the other cars have, but then there's also a run program switch, a max and min switch that gives you the maximum sound set or the minimal sound set, and then you got the master volume knob right there. Now, you'll notice in some of these close-ups there are no passengers in the cars. The Lionel 21-inch passenger cars do not come with passengers on the inside. However, it's very easy to add passengers on your own. All you have to do is take out 4 screws on the bottom and you're in, and then you add as many passengers as you want. I will definitely be adding passengers to these cars. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, mainly because I'm out of passenger figures and I need to order more. Then we've got the other dining car that came in that Station Sounds Diner 2-pack. And lastly, we've got the observation car, which came in the 4-pack. This one's called the Manhattan Island. You can see there. It's gorgeous. And on the end, you can see the 2 red marker lights, as well as the 20th Century Limited badge, and all of those light up when the car's on the track. All right, now we're going to have a bit of fun and do a little comparison between the Lionel Dreyfuss Hudson and the MTH Dreyfuss Hudson that I have from some years ago. So let's get the MTH version here. And there it is. And right off the bat, you can see it's kind of night and day, the difference in the color between the two. The MTH version is obviously a much darker gray than the Lionel version. However, I still think the Lionel version is very attractive, and I think they did a good job on it, and I like it. Now, of course, this is not quite an apples to apples comparison because the MTH model is the version with the shorter tender with the little coal hatches up on top, and it doesn't have the opening in the front for the coupler. But yeah, I think the Lionel version is a lighter shade of gray than most of us were expecting. I think the MTH model overall is more prototypical than the Lionel model, but that's par for the course. MTH tends to be more realistic in their models than Lionel, but I still think the Lionel model is absolutely gorgeous. You know, when it comes to comparing MTH to Lionel, it's never an equal comparison because there are pros and cons to both. You know, with MTH, I think you get more prototypical realism in the model, and also with MTH, you get more bang for your buck. They're generally a little more affordable than Lionel models. With Lionel, sometimes the realism is lacking a bit, but they make up for it with that incredible Lionel sound, and also Lionel has more cutting-edge features than MTH. So while the MTH model might be more realistic in appearance, the Lionel model has better sound and more cutting-edge features like whistle steam and the water scoop steam effect. But aside from the fact that I think this is actually a very attractive model, the most important thing to me is that it matches the passenger cars that Lionel sold to go with it. If they didn't match, I'd be a little upset, but with them all matching, they look gorgeous together, and so I'm okay with it. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the color of a model being off, I think there's 2 types of color being off. There's the color being off a bit, but the model still being very attractive, and then there's the color being off a bit and the model being but ugly. This is the former. So this is a model where, yeah, the color might be off if you compare it to the MTH model, but it's still a gorgeous model and I love it. Now compare that to my Lionel Southern Atlantic that they put out a couple years ago. This thing has the entirely wrong shade of green. I call it Kermit the Frog green, and I affectionately call this locomotive my Kermit the Frog engine because the green is just so hideously wrong that the entire thing looks awful, and you can barely read the Southern logo on the tender because that green is so bright and horrendous. So that's an example of having the color off and it being a hideous model. This is not that. This, yeah, it's a different variation of gray, but it's still gray and it's still a very attractive model. And like I said, it matches the passenger cars, and to me, that's the most important thing. But you know, everything I've said is just my opinion. Let me know what you think of these two. Which one do you like better? And also, we'll do a bit of a running comparison. I'm going to run the Lionel Dreyfuss for the most part because that's what this video is really about. But I'm going to cut in a few scenes of the MTH Dreyfuss in action. And again, you can let me know which one you like better.
Train 1 brakeman, let's get an application for continuity test. Good application, okay to release. Train 1 brakeman, we have good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Over.
That's a Roger. Good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Out.
Okay, first up, let's check out the whistle, and this does come with a choice of 5 different whistles. My favorite whistle is number 1. Let me know which whistle is your favorite. And by the way, the reason whistle number 1 is my favorite is because it lets me do this, which sounds so cool. Anyway, here's the other 4 whistles. And now let's check out the bell, and there are 5 choices of bell tones. My favorite is bell number 5, but let me know which bell is your favorite. And lastly, here's a sampling of some of the crew talk sounds.
Dispatch, I'm looking at that block signal. Can we move? Over.
Need to hold you. Hold for your signal. Out.
Train orders say holding the siding until 44 clears, then we can take the main. You should be through any minute.
What are your orders?
Says hold here for 2 east and then take the main to the next interlock. Hold the main and we'll hoop orders past the tower.
Air test is good. Ready to pull.
Better tense that fire while we're waiting. Gonna be a hard pull ahead. Gonna be here a while. Timetable has us holding here for number 9. She's running about 20 minutes late.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 20th Century Limited is now boarding.
The 20th Century Limited is now departing. Time to board the 20th Century Limited.
Your attention, folks. The dining car is now open for the first seating.
We are just about there, folks. Please gather your things. Here, let me help.
Dispatcher, going to the register room to sign out. Out.
All right, so there you have it, Lionel's latest Dreyfuss Hudson. I think this model is absolutely gorgeous. I love it, and I'm so glad I picked one up. I mean, it looks great, it runs great, it sounds great. What's not to like? You know, but I can't decide for you whether you like it. You've got to decide that for yourself. Now, if you do want to get one of these, if you get the Dreyfuss that has the PT tender and the water scoop steam effect like I got, the retail price is right at $1,800. If you get the Dreyfuss with the normal tender without the water scoop steam effect, the retail price is slightly lower at right at $1,700. And then if you want to get the matching passenger cars, they're pretty expensive. Yeah, Lionel passenger cars have gotten pretty pricey. So the 4-pack has a retail price right at $950. The normal 2-pack has a retail price right at $450. And the Station Sounds Diner 2-pack has a retail price right at $650. Yeah, they're very expensive, and that's why I only got 6 rather than the full 8. Now, keep in mind that every price I've mentioned here is the full retail price. If you go through a good Lionel dealer, you should be able to get a bit of a discount off those retail prices. And as always, if you're looking for a good Lionel dealer, try my favorite train store, which is Legacy Station. You can find them on the web at legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. If you'd like to support this channel, I would greatly appreciate it. That can be done through Patreon at patreon.com/ericstrains. Patreon supporters get access to all sorts of perks and benefits, and you can read about those benefits on my Patreon page. I'd like to put a big thank you out there to all of my current Patreon supporters. Your support means the world, not only to me, but to the future of this channel. And an extra super big thank you goes out to my premium tier Patreon supporters. You'll see their names at the end of this video. Anyway, that does it for now. I'm Eric Siegel. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.